This is the Asia Climate Finance podcast. The series is dedicated to the discussion and analysis of business and finance trends around the energy transition and decarbonization in Asia, the largest energy consuming region in the world. Hi, this is the 16th episode of the Asia Climate Finance podcast. It's September 9th, 2022. I'm your host, Joseph Jacobelli. Today we're speaking with Fulvio Bartolucci, who is in Shanghai. Fulvio is the managing director and co-founder of Adenergy, which is part of the Aden Group, and he is also the general manager of Tera Energies. Fulvio and I are going to be examining the developments and trends in China's clean electricity trading and try to look at the short and long-term outlook, as well as the finance and investment opportunities for local as well as overseas participants. Note that the views of our guests are their own and are not attributable to any affiliation, past or present. Good morning, Fulvio. A warm welcome to the Asia Climate Finance podcast. How are you today?
Hi, Joseph. I'm fine. We're wearing out the heat wave. Now weather is pleasant in Shanghai. We can breathe.
That's excellent. Well, the humidity and the heat wave hasn't stopped in Hong Kong right now, so we're waiting for a drier weather, hopefully in a few weeks. Fulvio, I think that most listeners may not be familiar with the Aden Group or Tera Energies. So perhaps you could start with you giving us some background on just some brief background on these companies?
Yeah, sure. In short, I think Aden Group, let's start from the mother company, has been working on facility management and facility services for mainly for industrial players in China and Southeast Asia for the past 20 years. And over the course of their growth, which brought them to, I think, serve around 1,500 individual clients in China. And what they did is to increase the level of services, so the added value of the services, and that brought them eventually, through maintenance and operation optimization, to come and deal with energy. And that's when actually I came into the picture. So to co-found this sort of like a corporate startup, which was Adenergy, as the energy service provider for this client. And Tera, it's a later development because I think we realized we needed also some stronger, sometimes partner for when it comes to investment in some of the larger technological development like wind. And that's where actually Total, RN, and RN Group, they join forces. And that's actually, those are the other companies behind Tera. So Total, RN, and RN Group for the renewable investment and for the energy efficiency and energy optimization related investment, who created Tera together with Aden Group, and it's one of the tools, the company we use for our energy services.
Understood. And I should emphasize, as far as I know, that when you're talking about 1,500 clients, they're not exactly small clients or individuals like myself. They're very large enterprises with tens of thousands of employees, unless I'm incorrect on that. I must say that in my analyst experience, both of these companies are indeed very, very unique. But before we start our discussion, could I trouble you to please share with us your own personal journey as an active participant in Asia's path to net zero?
I came actually I first came to China in 2005 for a very peculiar experience in an organization that at the time was a partially public, partially private, partially intergovernmental and governmental. It was an office under UNIDO, but also under the Chinese Ministry of Water Resources. It was working on rural development of rural electrification through hydropower. So that's been my very first contact to China and renewable energy in China. From them, so we developed the very first hydropower clean development mechanism project. So at the time where we had lots of European working on the carbon mechanism and clean development mechanism. So that was my team working on that very early on. That I built on that experience actually to transfer to a company, to a very innovative, interesting company called Azure International that was making consultancy and small investment again in renewable energy and energy efficiency. So very early on, even then, that was, we were talking about 2006, 2007. And through that company merged with in a European group called Ecofys, a concern that was very aggressive in investment on renewable energy efficiency, and in general, at the time was in the carbon market, so in the carbon emission reduction market. Through not only through trading, but also through the actual physical project investment in the field of biogas and landfill gas at the time. So I did a few years in this field, working on carbon markets, working on project investment in emission reduction project investment, and eventually these group sold their carbon trading, including our team, to Orbeo, which was a joint venture between Société Générale, the French bank, and Rhodia, a very large industrial player, a chemical industrial player. And so that we continued in the carbon market and the renewable. Eventually, we ended up in Rhodia, and from Rhodia, Solvay. Solvay also a very large chemistry industrial player in multinational. As under Solvay, I was the head of energy services, which meant really looking at the possibility to squeeze the efficiency out of the plants in Asia Pacific and study the energy transition opportunities to reduce the carbon exposure of the group. And I think around this point, it's where we saw that the experience that we had built up as a team, it was a little bit it had to be optimized probably in a larger scheme. So not only in a single group, but actually we could really use it much more for a larger audience. And that's where actually we joined forces with Aden Group to try and apply what we have learned on the energy transition and the skills developed by the team for all the client base. And that's what brought us to Adenergy and eventually Tera.
That's great, and I think it's really interesting and again unique background that you have. Having lived for so many years in Beijing and in Shanghai, and for full disclosure, we have known each other now for about 15 years, which makes me feel quite young. But yeah, so thank you for that anyway. And again, it's a very, very interesting journey indeed. Now, the focus of our discussion today is about electricity trading in China in general, and specifically renewable energy trading in particular, which we're also touching on some related areas. And just as a matter of background, I was just looking at some statistics, and for the first 7 months of the year, around about 2,960 terawatt hours of electricity in China went through the electric power trading center, or also known in Chinese as a Dianli Zhaoyi Zhongxin, or wholesale market. And that's around about an increase of 44% year on year, and it's around about 60% of total power consumption in the first 7 months, and that 60% itself is up 16 percentage points year on year. So the reason why I was talking about this statistic is just to emphasize that electricity trading in China is not exactly at an infant stage. It is evolving. It's still got a long way to go, but it is something that few people cannot really understand is quite active already in China. So maybe I can take the discussion into three rough areas, and of course we can, go into some of them in more depth. But first, your general thoughts about the energy transition in China from brown to green, and then maybe we can talk about specifically about electricity trading, direct power sales, and what's the market is like, and then move on in a little bit more depth to talk about renewable energy trading. So if that's okay with you, can you just share with us your overall kind of take on the energy transition from brown to green in China?
Sure. I think I would start by saying that China has a large advantage on one side and a large disadvantage on another. And obviously, I think the larger, the most concrete advantage is the fact that it's a very centralized management, which is able to push through some of the changes potentially a bit more easily than in other countries, should the central government decide so. And that is to some extent what is happening. On the other side, the reliance of China on manufacturing that we have seen these days, how much during this COVID period actually the export has only increased, despite all the limitation and complexities. Actually, Europe has been the share of goods imported from China has only increased, basically, and probably that thing is not going to change very soon. But it really implies some dependence. So and that means that China is really, but the manufacturing sector in China is very sensitive to price and price increase, and that means that when it comes to the grid right now, we know it's still very much reliant on coal. And that is one of the things that it will be the most complex to change, because that will imply very massive, pricing change eventually, be it in a market transformation, or be it even driven by the government to accommodate the change, and that will face a lot of hurdles, from state grid, and will face hurdles from the main player. So there are these two things which are now, coming at odds, and China is really working to set the scene for a bigger change. So you see a lot of underlying changes that are taking place. There is the preparation for the infrastructure of the storage infrastructure, the piloting for a larger role of local distribution schemes. And all of these, I think you can see as preparation work, but the real change has not yet come into into a higher gear. Let's put it like that. I think China has been adding a lot of green generation. I mean, huge amount. But I think the percentage of green generation into the overall structure is still relatively minor compared to what we would expect with that huge amount of capacity and generation adding. So that is to say that is the overall energy transition. I think right now we are really in building up the infrastructure for the change to really happen, while of course all the pieces come in place, but we are not really in a higher gear of this transition right now.
Right, and I mean that coal-fired kind of percentage in total generation, if I remember my numbers correctly, something like used to be 10 years ago maybe 80%, and now we're down to around about 50%. That's generation from coal-fired power plants. So the change has been massive, but at the same time you still got 50% of the electricity coming from coal-fired generation. So that's the kind of advantage and disadvantage, part of the advantages, disadvantage argument you were talking about.
But I think it's also that what has been made up, we don't have to imagine that it's been made up by renewables only, right? I think it's made up by nuclear, by combined cycle, natural gas. So I think what they did is they tried to went to more dispatchable or non-dispatchable form of power, which China actually, nuclear is included in the clean energy. So most of the numbers mentioning clean energy would include the nuclear power generation as well. So we'll have really to see, what it's what is behind this number. And for example, combined cycle natural gas is being growing a lot with the new pipelines, from Kazakhstan, Myanmar, and new, Spirit of Siberia. What is that? The new pipelines from Russia. So there is a shift which is not be entirely to renewable, even though renewable has been growing massively.
Right, and those numbers are not. And that build-up is not going to slow down anytime soon, given they've got very, very ambitious targets when it comes to onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, etc. Cool. So maybe we can, now that we've given a very, very high level, kind of 3,000 feet picture of your thoughts about the energy transitions, the kind of strength and challenges, shall we move on talking a little bit about electricity trading and direct power sales in China, and what actually the market is like, and especially, when it comes to the national electric power companies like Huana, Datang, etc. But not just them, but also how industry is participating.
In the trading, first of all, I would say there's been spearheaded by China Southern Grid. So that I think that is being the most open to actually to try out. Trading pilot is started earlier, and it went further until now. So and we can say that the participation has been extremely broad and extremely enthusiastic by both the generation side and also the industrial player. It was a way originally to get a little bit more accessible, a cheaper price of electricity. And the reason is because at the very beginning, the trading was only open to the excess amount of power generated. So it was only the power that was not committed to the state grid or to China Southern Grid. So it was limited to that amount. And because of that, it was kind of like some extra dollars, so they were generally priced very efficiently or very conveniently in order to sell in a bit some of that extra power. So that was the original development. And again, I think we can see the traditional way that China develop things. So it goes with pilot that maybe do not have a massive impact, but based on those experiences, you go and you tweak them, and eventually they may become larger. They cover larger part of the scope. And from that beginning, now what we see is that mainly on the East Coast, actually power trading is covering more and more of the power demand and power supply. To Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Shandong, they're all very much, they had their own provincial, interprovincial, basically power markets, and these are growing a lot in coverage, to the extent that the latest, actually right now, the government and the DRC, who is starting to mandate for most electricity, basically for all the high user, for them to pass through the power trading as an exclusive way to source their power, and only for the extra, for those who cannot be in the platform for some reason, then they could go through the grid. But what happens is that, for example, while those in the platform, there is a price mechanism with a cap and a floor in a way. While for those who cannot be in that platform, then the grid could actually charge higher transmission lines. So this is something, is a rule that is valid in Shandong, but in general, it's just to show the fact that there is a push from the central government to put a bit more capacity on the trading market, so that it can be explored further. And right now, obviously, we are talking about the general electricity market. the green part is a subsection of it and has a different level of development.
Mm-mm-mm. And again, talking about the electricity power trading, which you mentioned some statistics up front, there's also an enormous amount of, there's a body of legislation coming through as well. And I think one of the announcements was one of the bigger announcements was in January 2022, where the NDRC basically set out a document talking about the building of a national unified electricity market. So the point I'm trying to make is that the path is pretty much set towards that. But obviously it's not linear and there's many hurdles and many potholes, so to speak. But that at least is a general kind of direction. So let's
maybe just maybe just a clarification, because maybe people may have different ideas about what is a trading market. Because right now the way that the trading market work in China, there are only a very small part is a spot market. So it's in fact I would say the long term and which is like 1 year or more, or the short term like 1 month or multi-month contract are those which are mainly traded. So it's not like we don't have to imagine like a spot, really like a totally market-driven spot market for the time being. So right now, I think the percentage in places like Shandong or other is like 80-20, like a 20% spot market, 80% long-term. So that is what it is now. But like you said, the direction is set. I think the first step was actually to bring more contracts, which used to be normal, grid offtake contract, to bring it on a market, and eventually from there, to see how you can explore further the spot part or the market demand part into, and how that can have a bigger influence over time.
And to be very factual about it, I mean, if you look at other markets like the European electricity trading market, wholesale markets, or Australia, I mean, they've been going on for like 20 years, and they're still evolving, and the rules are still changing, and it's still transitioning in some ways, and the market as regulators try to perfect the market, although it's very difficult. So China is at the early stage of that. But it's definitely, the path is set and it's very active. So let's talk a little bit about renewables. I mean, they are gaining in importance, and of course, as you mentioned earlier, you do have the fact that nuclear is included into renewables in China, or clean energy at least, as well as hydro. And once you take those out, actually the percentage of wind and solar, although it is growing massively year on year, it's still a very small percentage of the total. But could you take us through a little bit how that's kind of working, the renewable energy trading in China in general?
Yeah. I would say that things are changing in the past 1 year, and I would say they are accelerating now. I think it all started from the new Chinese renewable energy, 5-year development plan, which came out very recently, came out this June. And I think that gave a little bit some of the ideas how the government is planning to push. I mean, first of all, the general idea is that the generation is bound to double from 2020 to 2025. So it's supposed to be able to double the overall generation. And the way so where actually this will found this new generation, it's on one side, on develop large, what they call, I think now it's very popular, the renewable energy base. So it's not the project itself, but the base. It's a very large area that is devoted to renewable energy. And the difference from before is just that before it was an area which was given to potentially to a wind project or to a solar project. I think right now the plan is to have a joint development. So the area it will be for solar plus wind plus storage. So that's what they call right now renewable energy base. And what is instead also very interesting, and it's a little bit new into the, I think, the policy, in the relevance that has in the policy now, it's the push for the distributed what China is they call distributed, renewable energy, especially solar and wind. I think that normally here refers to smaller capacity. So while the renewable base are huge capacity of the gigawatt size, distributed is really like for solar normally we're talking about less than 6 megawatt. For wind, maybe in a few tens of megawatt, but less than 50 megawatt. And what means is that these are capacity and projects which are supposed to be much closer to the user. So that is the key difference. Is that China right now is looking. I think probably also because there is a little bit of limit. We are reaching the limit of the super high voltage distribution line, and I think that is really one of the bottlenecks. So I think right now in this new plan, they will be really pushing the distributed renewable energy. So those which can happen near the consumption point, so near the city, near the industrial parks, etc. And I think the third of the strategy which are mentioned and highlighted into the new plan is really a more stringent approach to the quota. Let's say to a consumption quota for provinces, for players, for industrial players. I think these will be the different tools that will be used. And the reason why I think it's important to start from that is because when you see on what you go down and read what are the strategies, there are ancillary strategies for that. You do see an awareness of what has been until now the bottlenecks for the capacity to trade the renewable at a local level. So one of the things that will change, and at least in the plan, is that the TAD, the transmission and distribution pricing, is supposed to favor distributed renewable electricity. And I think the reason is because although it was somewhere in the policy before, but if you want to buy from your next door solar, your neighbor basically solar, or solar plant, you pay transmission and distribution fee as if it's coming from Inner Mongolia. It was supposed to be different, but in fact the implementation has been extremely slow, and as a matter of fact, you pay that much. And this actually shows a little bit of a power struggle between the NDRC, which is pushing for reforms, the national NDRC, and the state grid, especially the local state grids, which are actually instead pushing for maintain their controls and their source of income, and you want to say. The second point, and is connected to the first, is actually to bring down the barriers to trading, general trading, basically to the access of renewable energy into trading market. So those trading market which we just talked about. And on the other side, also to facilitate something that was not possible before, or actually it's just become possible, the trading of distributed power renewable energy projects. And so the difference between these two things is that in the first refers to the very large project, so they can participate into the power trading market, just like normal power plants, basically on the supplier side. The second item is in fact refers to and is very interesting, is that the capacity of distributed capacity. So the small project, which can be just beside the plant, alone or in aggregate, to actually to participate in this trade. And I think this is a very new thing that probably will require some more legislation locally, but it's something that has been expressed a few times in this document. So it means it's really a direction that it is being pushed. And in order, I mean, this there is another facilitating items in all these. That is the allowance or the encouragement of private connection between high power user and local or nearby renewable projects. So because this is one of the things that the state grid always opposed. So the idea was for the grid that all the power passed through state grid. And the fact of having instead private connection, it's a way to bypass the state grid. So it's you see into the general plan some things that are supposed to make it more flexible for player to to use renewable energy locally, which is generated within a certain area and consumed within that same area.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those who are familiar with China, they will know that the state grid is one or probably the most economically powerful energy entities in the whole of China, even more so than the oil companies. And I mean, you've seen in most countries, whether it's our home country, Italy, or other countries like France, where the incumbent electric power monopoly doesn't really want to give up its powers, excuse the pun, so to speak. So it is something which is an evolution and will take some time. But the interesting point is that the central authorities are very, very aware of this. And they've been very vocal about it, including in Chinese media about it. And so I think we will see some change going forward. At least that's my 2 pennies worth, or 2 fen worth, given that we're talking about China and we should speak in renminbi. But talking about this energy trading, is there any kind of opportunities? I mean, the investment and financing opportunities or finance opportunities for local participants are obvious, and not just the big players like the Huaneng and Datang, et cetera, of this world. But what about for overseas participants or participants from abroad? Is the market open? Is it closed, or is it uncertain? Are there any opportunities on that front? I mean, one point I always like to make is that there's some people that think, for example, that foreign enterprises are not allowed to invest into renewable energy in China or any form of energy generation, which is absolutely incorrect, because you've had overseas players investing in China for a very long time. It hasn't been a flood of them compared to places, say, like Thailand, just because domestically, there's a lot of very formidable players. So it's a matter of competition rather than barriers of entry. But when it comes to kind of electricity trading in general and renewable energy trading in particular, what are your kind of thoughts on that?
I would say that the actual situation is very it's comparable to the investment as a green power generator, because let's say power trading has been right now the retailers or the power traders are somehow very much connected to either daughter company to State Grid or daughter company to the big power producers. And it is true that it was in a phase of the market where trading was really a possibility for generation for generators to improve their operational hours. So instead of being curtailed at 70%, 60%, they had through trading the chance to improve their generation, therefore generation hours, therefore to increase their efficiency. So until now they had not the real pool for margins into the trading. Actually, a lot of this trading house was like the main aim was to increase operational hours for the suppliers, and as such, there was really very little margins taken. I think things are bound to change once more and more of the generation have to pass through the market, and I think that becomes more of more of a real market, let's say, rather than a secondary market. It becomes more of a primary market, and that means that will change the kind of players which will be able to make or to make a living, or simply to really develop more additional services out of it. Let's say what I mean is that while until now it was really a very simple intermediary, what is will the development of the market, then what we may need at that point is actually more added value services, which we don't have now. Like, we are not in a moment where actually in this market, they do not really have futures market, for example. And in the moment that actually a secondary market will be developed, so that is where actually the experience of foreign players could come very much handy to understand how those services could be better optimized. I think the presence is very much right now is liberalized. So before, it was very complex to get a license to be a reseller retailer. Right now, it's relatively easy compared to some time ago. So there are much less barriers than before. And but the market is still relatively simple in terms of mechanism. I see that the space, could actually be increased for those who are willing to take a position by bringing experience for a more advanced power market. On the other side, the other layer that could be interesting is actually those, even how can we define it? Even cooperatives of consumers. But I mean, actually something or some retailer or traders which are catering to special needs from the large industrial consumers. And so we do see we have a lot of requests for green power, green generation. And in this moment, I think it's just one component of some of these trading areas. But in the future, I think it's the way that the green power will evolve. It's probably may have a peculiar evolution. But by that, what I mean is that on one side, actually, would be completely not peculiar, meaning that it will be traded the same as normal power. Right? While right now it's kind of a subsection of the power market. I think more and more we'll see from that point of view a normalization of the green energy market. But on the other side, I think there are some specific component of the green energy market, like the GEC, the green energy credit, which will have they are in the course of being reinforced and more and become more solid, because those will be more and more important for those who want to demonstrate the reliability of their green supply. I think right now, China already have this this GEC, this green energy certificate, which comes together with renewable energy. But what happens is that there are some doubts, because there is some potential space for double counting for this certificate, basically for this project to maybe also account as a carbon emission reduction project. But these things are in course right now of being this possibility of being erased, and this certificate to become more solid, more strong, and guaranteed by the government. So this is what I say, is that there are some characteristics of the renewable energy market which will come on top of the pure power trading, and those are potentially areas where some players like the European US, which are used to understand how to deal, combine, and coordinate between these different, the actual power and the environmental prerogatives which comes with trading. It may have, at least an initial phase of the market, a lot of role in relationship to multinational players, which they are looking for the same things that they can find in other markets.
I think what's interesting is if we can draw some parallels with the Japanese market. Before Japan opened up its market for electricity trading back in 2016 or so, 1st of April 2016, foreign players basically said, it's impossible to get into the Japanese market. Everything is in Japanese. Japanese players are the major players, et cetera, et cetera. And what you saw, and at the time, I remember writing some research basically saying, well, no, I mean, at the end of the day, an electricity market is an electricity market. Yeah, an electricity market has local characteristics which have to be taken into account, but the commodity is exactly the same. I mean, it's, you generate the power and you use the power. So the actual mechanism is fairly straightforward. And you saw probably by 2017, 2018, you actually had quite a lot of European players, a couple of US players as well, but mostly European players actually getting into the Japanese market. And you've got people like NL, again from NLX, from our country, Italy, and you've got other players like the Germans are there, Centrica from the UK is there, and I think my personal two pennies worth is that I see the same happening in China over time, obviously. So and China is such a huge market. I mean, Japan is 1,000 terawatt-hour market, and China is multiple times that level. But talking about the green energy certificates or credits, which in some other countries are called renewable energy credits, but then or certificates, it's pretty much the same. Could you tell us what are your thoughts on the whole kind of carbon trading that we've been hearing a lot about within China? Do you have any particular views on carbon trading?
Since carbon trading had a very interesting political, I would say, story inside China, because it's been a little bit juggled between two big players of Chinese environmental and energy policy, so which is basically the Ministry of Environment and the NDRC, the National Reform Commission. And you see moment where it's been actually completely under where its regulation has been falling under the Ministry of Environment. It's a little bit the time where it's the coordination with the energy policy decrease a little bit, and so he follow his own course as a typical environmental regulation. I think we are now on a rising tide, I would say, again of the interest of NDRC on the carbon side, at least in part, and we saw that also in the latest development, the new plan for renewable energy, because they do specify the green energy certificate, and also they specify that one of the issues that it will solve is the role and overlapping or non-overlapping, basically between that and the carbon credit. So I think right now we are in the moment where the government is actually trying to figure out the exact relationship between the different tools that are somehow all leading to the general target of China, the famous 30-60 target, so the carbon peaking in 30 and the decarbonization, the carbon neutrality in 2060. So this overall decarbonization strategy are now, they have several tools. They're trying to figure out, so what's the relationship between these tools? That was the problem that was mentioned. Now the potential double counting between the offset under the one emission trading scheme and the renewable energy trading on the other side. I think we do not have the formal, right now, a response. I think it will be coming out. Probably we see there's a lot of work being done behind the curtain with a lot of consulting with main players. We expect something in the autumn, end of the years, to actually to qualify this relationship. And that means so to arrive, this big introduction, actually to arrive to the point that I see the carbon market and the renewable energy market as a part of the general power market, to actually to have a renovated use for the carbon market, especially once it becomes more clear what the players are to can expect from these, because you see the bigger, in this moment you have the bigger consumers, which have on one side the big consumers, the bigger generators, which have on one side are the only one which are really now covered by the Chinese national emission trading scheme. On the other side, they're also the one which are subject of the quota, and there are the issue of the green electricity. So it's a very, the position it's very complex, and what they can do in order to pass down to the consumer, it's very limited, because that is the mechanism in Europe. So the whole idea of the emission trading scheme is that you increase the cost of carbon power, basically the cost of carbon, so that this cost is passed down to the consumer, and that somehow influence the choices of the consumer. So that was the overall idea. But in this moment in China, the problem is that pass down effect, not having a market working, power market which can pass down the increase in cost, was not really effective. So it was actually the whole concept of the ETS was not working properly because it was not leading to a signal to the consumers. That is the reason why I was trying to explain that the key thing is to solve this relationship. That is a complex relationship which is involving the power market, the different tools of the power market and the carbon market, because you need to be able to pass down that signal down to the consumers, because that's what you need for the decarbonization. And so the idea is that this relationship between these two parts actually they are now working on how to solve, at least in a pilot phase, and at that point so the market can start and be pushed again. And by pushed again we mean that from the current level of only having mainly the power consumer to be covered, then it will really come to cover more and more part of the industries. And hopefully, at least hopefully for the world, if not for these poor guys, for also covering to the buildings, commercial buildings, because that is they are a growing size of the power consumptions, but right now they're not explicitly covered by any standard or criteria which is bound to reduce the consumption from the built environment.
One last question or remark on kind of the current state of electricity trading in China in general and renewable energy trading in particular. What about the role of digitalization? Because China has been very, very strong on that side of things. If we think about it, at least internally, do you see any role for digitalization to help with some of the issues that you mentioned? And perhaps subsets of digitalization like blockchain technology?
Absolutely, yes. It's a crucial component, and the reason why I say with quite some confidence is because I see that as one of the I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation the infrastructure building, and these infrastructure building involves the digitization of the system. So the reason, if we say the fact that right now one of the first move, without really changing the prices at stake, the players, but just to have, for example, all the what was now a contract, a distribution contract between a user and a power grid, and to place that on a central trading platform. It's one of the tools really to impose a certain degree of digitalization to this to the accounting, really to the real which is behind the power. So it's that at that point on the platform you have a much clearer idea of the flows that are of the demand, of the evolution of demand, and that is made actually with a very powerful digitization tool. And then you see like the grid is investing, the power units are them investing to understand their own need and their own numbers, and make potentially analysis and make eventually arbitrage in the future. So these are all tools which both the players which will access on the supply side and the players which will access on the demand side will all need to have a greater awareness of what is their consumption partner, to have potential forecast. And these are all tools which you can only do once your overall digitalization strategy has increased and it becomes more mature. So right now, as a player, it was not really too much needed, because you were connected to the grid. So whatever power you need, so you take it from the grid, and in the end of the month you get a bill. So if once you put it all on the market, then you need to be much more aware that there is an evolution of this market. There is an evolution of your own demand, which could be seasonal, could depend on your production cycles, and that it will be a crucial information to cross-reference if you want to optimize your power cost on one side, or if you want to facilitate the increase of renewable energy. Because we know that the problem of renewable energy is that it's not fully dispatchable. I mean, you don't really decide when to have it. So you need to have a system which you're able to modulate. And that includes storage, and that includes also, modulation of the demand, demand side activity. And all these requires a smart management capacity. So it requires that, that the plant are able to forecast, to send a signal about what will be the demand in a few hours, in a few days, and potentially maybe in a few months, and for the whole system to adjust dynamically to this. And without digitalization, this is just not possible. So it's just simple stuff. There are not going to be a person which is going to have a headache and get all these numbers and try to send again market signals or regulation which takes account of that. So there will be a very important need, and that eventually will bring us closer to the whole point of the smart city as well, because we'll need the general consumer side, which include also the commercial, maybe the residential as well, to be, and even the whole maybe an EV sector, the electrical vehicle sector in different stage, to be able to store, release, modulate their consumption based on the availability of resources, and potentially through a price signal or maybe through other form of demand response signals. And all these requires some central platform, especially which breaks the silos of information that is owned by different components, of society, of the consumer, of the producer, etc. So that's one of the work we are doing within the industry, within the industrial sector, to try and prepare that through data platform which are able both to optimize, but also to forecast and to receive and send messages from the grid. It could be the state grid, the general grid, or it could be local grid potentially in the future.
I was going to go into a tangent and talk about some of my research on blockchain-based smart contracts between electric vehicle owners and the storage owner. But I think that in itself would be a different podcast, because it's a very complex and very interesting subject. But if I can just move to another kind of final topic, which is some forward-looking thoughts from you. I mean, you've experienced China's renewable energy, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's the carbon markets, etc., for over 15 years. So, based on your experience, where do you see the trading of renewable energy in China heading over the next 1, 2, 3 decades?
I think, if you allow, I would like to make a forward-looking things, but actually taking a little bit of some roots in something that I see happening literally now, which we are talking about in the last few months. And so I refer to some of the regulations which have been issued first by Zhejiang, then also Hubei province in Inner Mongolia, and so it's very rooted in a way. So I would like to root a little bit the future, looking into these things, and because you see where the legislator would like things to go, but is also aware of some of the obstacles there. And if you see that, there's been a lot of discussion about, like we said before, distributed power trading. So it's and that that is the route that right now there are policies in place to encourage distributed power trading. And what I read in terms of forward looking is really that China probably is going to allow and want to move on large, island, which may be more or less self-sustainable, which includes maybe a component of trading between a larger component or smaller grids, but actually grids which are to some extent built to be reliant and sustainable in themselves, which in between the different generation, the consumption, the storage capacity. And so that is, I really see that the pieces have been built to allow for that. Right now, when you read this legislation, you have some keywords which are like incremental demand or incremental power supply, which right now they just made, it's part of this dance of equilibrium that I said between the big players like State Grid and the new vision. Incremental means actually newly constructed. So the idea is that, okay, don't worry, we are not going to touch your established interest State Grid, we just look at the newly built. But if you remove that incremental, you see a little bit the vision, is that you have these locally traded, basically distributed power trade, not only, like a few years ago, only the idea that there will be a huge, super high, transmission voltage from one part to the other. Then on the other side, in fact, the other things that you see in this policy now, Zhejiang, Hubei, in Mongolia, the direct trading between adjacent, power consumption unit and power generation. So it's and how through incremental right now, but in the future just through power distribution network, which could be even independent of the grid. So you already see now in what is being mentioned. Of course, right now they still mention that incremental to say, okay, we're not going to touch your interest. But if you read that between lines, is that there is an infrastructure building for some local grid or microgrid to be more and more independent with own captive plants, which will be renewable or and storing capacity. And the storing capacity is more and more in form of energy, not only in form of electricity. So we're not talking about batteries only, we're talking about storing energy in form of heat, in form of cooling, in many forms which can be used by society at large. So and offer more flexibility to that. So I think it's, I do see, looking really farther away, that this distribution network could be one of the way that the reformers are seeing the overall development of a grid that is more flexible, more reliable, because it's made by a lot of smaller grid, which of course are connected so that they could use some flexibility from between one another, but they are made to be more resilient. And I think that looks also at what we see, these extreme weather events. I think what we do need is smaller grids which they do not have a cascade impact one to the other. So which should they become stronger by being connected, but if one has a significant problem, we're not going to cause the collapse potentially of another provincial grid, for example. So I do see a lot power trading to be as much as possible be localized. Obviously, in China, local it's something that could be in Europe. It could be
massive.
Yeah, local. It's a very peculiar concept. So it could be very large. But what I read in this regulation preparation, which are coming out this summer in Zhejiang, in Hubei, in Inner Mongolia, the reference to a lot about distribution network, about local trading, exclusive power transmission lines, they're all signal that there is a will to try the composition of a more resilient grid that is made by local trading and local distribution and flexibility mechanisms.
No, that's some great insights. Great, Fulvio. So before we wrap up, I should say, could I please ask you maybe for some final thoughts or final takeaways?
You can. I think something that lately I am saying to a lot of our clients that while for a long time um, the password or the key has been optimization, right? In industry, we want to optimize this, optimize that, and that's still very much true in general. But given the level of change and uncertainty, and I bring that to the power market, it comes from the even not only power market, like we see the influence of COVID had on the influx of goods. What is really, I think, important to consider as a decision maker, be it from a supplier of power, from someone who is looking at trading, or someone who is want to increase their their reliability or want to decarbonize as a big consumer. The key to take into account is for me is flexibility. Now, I think what really we need to think is a system that is flexible, is reliable at the same time. I think that is what important. And in all this, I think digitalization or digitization, it's an important component because it allows you to have real-time understanding of your position, and based on that, taking arbitrage or mark-to-market decisions. And I think that is really what it comes from all these. Even China, that to some extent appear to us more stable, let's say, that some other markets because of its centralization, but still it's not independent, or it's not completely, I would say, untouched by all the different momentous change which are happening all the time. And that just, to me, leads to the point that, like we say, we saw, the lack of energy in the south of China, the droughts in the west of China, the whole Sichuan, which has been blocked for weeks by drought, and like last summer, similar between the dynamics between the hydro base of Yunnan and the power markets in Guangdong. This whole situation of uncertainty, it's really going to touch us strong. And to build in flexibility into the energy system, so the capacity to store, to reduce, to modulate energy, and using the market, using internal tools for that, I think it's really the big thing. Is the market they're relevant in a way that can maybe increase to some extent the flexibility of the choices by sending signal which whoever is smart, has the right infrastructure, can make use of those signals to increase the flexibility in his own system. And this, to explain what I mean, is, for example, if you have storage devices, sometimes in a very stable system, storage doesn't really help much. But if you have a market system like the one we are coming towards, where actually the pricing between a peak and low could be very different, then in that case, those early movers, which are building some flexibility in their system, capacity to compress or increase the demand based on those signal or on resource availability, actually now they can have a price from the market. So as early movers, while in some time down the road, they may just be needed by everyone because it will be part of this smaller network, even not too small, but it's a smaller network compared to what it is now. So the key word, it's really modulability or flexibility, but the capacity on demand to modulate your position onto an energy market.
That's fantastic. Fulvio, I'm really, really, really thankful for your time today. I know you've got to go and make some investments, so I don't want to take too much of your time. And I really appreciate all of your insights.
Thank you very much, Joseph. It was lovely to talk as usual.
I hope you did enjoy this episode of the Asia Climate Finance podcast. I would really appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, etc. My contact is in the show notes. Thank you.